So, welcome to the podcast again. My name's Robert Lee, and today we have with us a special guest, Etienne, and I hope I'm going to say the surname right, Louvet.
Louvet, yeah.
Close enough. Well, maybe not close enough. I'll try and get it right. Etienne Louvet.
Yeah,
Perfect.
exactly.
Thank you. Etienne is the CEO and founder of and I'm going to struggle with this slightly, Etienne. You're the first drone solutions provider for rural and
And
faraway places, logistics and
yeah,
deliveries.
complex environment and remote places in general. So yeah,
Okay. So,
and the name of the company being IONA, coming from the Isle of Iona, which is exactly this example. It's just 18 inhabitants next to the Isle of Mull, in Scotland, and it's one of the only primary schools in the entire UK without access to school meals, just because there is 1 kilometer of water in between.
oh my gosh, wow.
Mm.
And that's a wonderful story to have named your company after something, that actually has a backstory to it as well.
Yeah, it's important. Well, I was looking for something. I really like the name, to be honest, and I'm not like embarrassed to say it. I really like the name because it means something, and at the same time, it sounds a bit tech,
Hmm.
and yet it's coming from. It has a very long history in the books, and yeah, we were working with Scotland. Scotland is supporting a lot
Right.
in terms of business, in terms of facilities, even academic support, projects, and everything. And so it was paying tribute, and I hope that very soon we will deliver to this place.
Well, I hope so too. So tell me a little bit more about Iona and how, well, what the plans are and how you're going to take it forward.
So we started 2 years ago, and the purpose was let's do drones, but not because we want to fly things.
Hmm.
I actually don't have an aerospace engineer background.
Hmm.
I have an aviation background in a way because I worked in this industry a bit, but that's pretty much it.
Hmm.
Um, and the full name of the company being IONA Logistics. It's just like we looked at a problem and we addressed it with drones. The way it started is that, as many people, I suppose, during the lockdown, I had a lot of time to think, and I went back to a small village in Brittany where my family is like has ties, um, and we're talking about 800 inhabitants probably
Right.
in Brittany,
Yeah.
so west of France. And there I noticed the paradox of my grandmother's pharmacy in the middle of the pandemic was a 30 minutes drive back and forth, except that she couldn't drive. And so thankfully we were there. I had cousins and everything, so we took care of her.
Hmm.
But it made me realize we are in a position, or well, if you don't have a family or if you don't have relatives supporting you and that you can't drive because you don't have a car or because you're too old or in a way disabled or anything like that,
Hmm.
you are completely dependent and you don't even have, even at a premium, a service to help you out. Like if you don't have an aide or if you don't have like someone to support.
Yeah.
Um, and it just like, okay, let's consider what are the solutions to that.
Hmm.
From there, drones were considered for quite some time. Many people think about Amazon from 2013.
Yes.
And then some people might know about Zipline, which is they're doing a fantastic work with medical deliveries in Rwanda, and they start to operate in other places now.
Right.
Um, and so the problem is, first, drones, it's like saying vehicles with wheels. You can say, like, it's very vague. You can do a lot of things with drones, basically.
Yes.
And as any type of vehicles, it has to be specifically made and designed for a need. And so that's why I usually present the company saying that we are the first that fits, like, that is designed for the needs and the regulations of deliveries in these places.
Right.
Um, so what do we have to do? Like, that was the second question. Okay, drones can be helpful because we identified the problem in logistics in those places where the volume and population density, it's just impossible to amortize cost and even CO2 emissions per kilo transported. when the maximum that you have to deliver in this place, like this community, for instance, is going to be 10 kilos per
Mm-hmm.
day maximum, and you will be using a delivery van of minimum 2 tons to do it. And just, it can't work. And
Yeah.
if you're in a complex environment, like an island, like an archipelago, or like just mountains or any type of complex environment,
Mm-hmm.
you will end up using even more energy because you might have to go on a ferry, you might have to go on a plane, you have like, and so the cost and CO2 emissions are adding up. I say CO2e, it's a CO2 equivalent.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course.
With like all the in case of,
Yes.
and so all the cost and CO2 emissions are adding up, and in the end, you have a situation like in Scotland. We started to work on Scotland because they have data. And so it was a fantastic case study, and they were very keen to work with us and to support. You have the Scottish Parliament who worked on rural deliveries and surcharges. And so in two, like in, for instance, you have 1 million people in Scotland who can't access standard deliveries. And it means that the people in this case, either they have to pay surcharges to get the parcels and mail in general,
Mm-hmm.
or they have to drive to the collection points. And it means that in terms of surcharges in 2021, for instance, you have 45 million pounds in delivery surcharges for very few people. So it's a lot on a
Right.
few shoulders. And on top of that, the cost and CO2 emissions of people driving individually to get a parcel of 1 kilo in a 2 tons vehicle is really not great. And
Yeah.
so we wanted to find a solution, and we did with drones now. Uh, but coming back to the first point, what was needed? And so what was needed is, first, we needed to have a drone that has a vertical takeoff and landing capacity to operate anywhere. You're not going to have an aerodrome in your garden, so it's probably important.
Yes.
And the second thing was energy efficiency. I usually say that energy efficiency is the unit economics of the engineering world.
Mm-hmm.
And so energy efficiency in the case of a drone, you need to get a wing. And so you need to have the lift provided by a wing like a plane. And an aircraft that accumulates both first didn't exist, but it didn't exist because also it was quite complex in terms of fluid dynamics and in terms of flight control system.
Right.
And so we had to find partners. And on that,
Mhm.
first on the team, so the concept developer is Dr. Saif Dinakani. He's one of the best UAV engineers in the world. He won the Genius New York Prize in 2019 for his work on drone technologies.
Right.
And he was the aerodynamicist for Ferrari in F1, but when they were winning. And and so he created a model because first problem, fluid dynamics, first challenge, fluid
Mm-hmm.
dynamics. He created an aircraft that is designed for that extremely well, to the point that we are 4 times more energy efficient in terms of than any alternative. So it means that energy efficiency in aerospace means that you can either like have larger cargo, longer ranges, or just less electricity. In our case, electricity to operate.
Right.
First challenge, quite okay. Second challenge, flight control. When we're talking about the flight control, we're talking about the software inside that will enable you to, a bit like a DJI, if you used one for your holidays, for instance.
Yes.
It has to like do the return to balance, for instance. A DJI balances itself in the air, and any drone has to do that. It's like mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
So the flight control, we had access straight away to Cronfield University, that has the Department for Autonomous Systems, which is headed by Professor Antonius Tsordos. I mention his name because he was instrumental in the early successes of the company,
Mm-hmm.
and they were extremely supportive. They offered to incubate us at first, just like having a co-working space there when it was just me and two other people working on it.
Mm-hmm.
Then we started to grow, and so they said like, well, we have a building next to with a workshop, a garage, and like a co-working space. Maybe we could use it.
Yeah.
And so we just grew a bit, and we had the workshop, so we built the drone on it.
Mm-hmm.
In it. Now we're trying to negotiate for a second workshop. So I'm mentioning it in case they hear.
Yes.
And yeah, it expanded from there. So we have a drone now that is extremely interesting for many aspects. When we're talking about cargo, it can be cargo for medical, it can be cargo for day-to-day items. if you want to get deliver a plasma TV, you don't need us in a way, because in that case, you can just wait for a delivery van to pass by. I usually say we are a complementary tech. We're not going to replace delivery vans.
Got it.
And the same way, we're not doing cappuccino deliveries. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not our thing.
Mhm.
It doesn't make sense in terms of unit economics, but that's another problem. And so we have to like find something that is compelling enough. And when you have people suffering from logistics being an enabler. If you don't have logistics, you can't have a business somewhere, for instance.
True.
A shop that doesn't have access to logistics or a delivery offer will just be completely ruined by the local supermarkets, which will be, with its volume, capable of providing delivery at loss,
Right.
which is usually what they do.
Yeah.
So local shops can sustain themselves. Local SMEs are struggling. You usually just can't do it in like a remote places. Pharmacies will have to struggle with like people dependent on each other to get the medication they need and everything. Like when you create efficient logistics, you create the conditions for a thriving economy. And at the moment, and which wasn't the case for the past 30 years, we're starting to understand that we need industries. We need to relocalize, and we delocalized pollution for quite some time. Now we need to relocalize, think about the new industries, think about the new renewables and everything.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to do that if you tell people, yeah, you're going to work in like a renewable power plant. It's wonderful. It's in the middle of nowhere and you have access to nothing. You want to sign?
Yes, I get it. I get it.
You need basic deliveries. We're not talking about like having everything in 10 minutes, because we don't need to. And we're doing a logistics company, so we're not like responsible for what the people get delivered. But
Mm-hmm.
usually I see that some from time to time. I see that sometimes people are looking down on rural areas, saying like, yeah, but they don't need it. Or I even heard, I won't say who, but I even heard like famous investors saying like, yeah, but they don't have delivered, like at the moment, statistically speaking, if you look at the figures, they don't get delivered, so it means they don't need it. No, it means it doesn't exist. So
Yeah,
of course, if you don't have
they would
access,
have never had it in
you
the
don't
first
have many
place.
parcels.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, we're trying to, yeah, I did a long intro. We're trying to tackle this challenge.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that. I mean that's a really in-depth like overview of everything that's going on. I understand quite a bit now about the business and the actual motivation behind it as well, because you can see the customer challenge, which is actually there and it's quite evident. And you're right, you might not have been able to see much data
Mm,
on it existing previously, but there wouldn't have been any because people just wouldn't have been having deliveries,
mm,
right? It wouldn't have
yeah.
existed before. Um, I think what I liked about what you've said is that you've actually looked really in depth
Mm,
at what the customer challenges were, what the problems were, what were the actual things that were needed. And far too often, what tends to happen with most companies when they're trying to build out new products is that they don't even know
mm,
exactly who the defined customer is, because they're trying to boil the ocean and be everything to
mm,
everybody, but you actually do know who it is that you're targeting,
mm.
which is really, really good. Um, so now you've got your customer segment, and you've clearly articulated the engineering challenge that you had as well. What are the next challenges that you're facing?
Well, I think the to reply on something that you mentioned is what we have is social desirability. Usually we talk about social acceptability, which is good enough. What we try to achieve is social desirability. It it's connection with what you said, because it's a challenge in drone deliveries in general. Some people are afraid of the tech, and you always have early adopters, late adopters, and everything. So you have to consider that. We also have to consider that my personal belief, and looking at the data also of other companies, is that when you have a very big problem and that you have a very compelling solution, anything can adapt. And I sometimes take the example of Uber. I I grew up in Paris. Taxis were awful. and the service was terrible, and it was very expensive and everything. And Uber actually started in Paris because they were looking for a taxi then, and they realized that it was a nightmare. It was raining, they didn't have a service and everything. Considering the French culture that everybody knows about in terms of strikes and everything, who could have thought that a service like Uber would have been not only accepted but legalized, and it works perfectly well now, and VTCs are accepted, and you don't have like anything else because people wanted to, because the need like was there. It's not super strongly, it's like convenience in that
Mm-hmm.
case, but it means that yeah, there is a compelling solution to a problem that we had. The next challenge for us is to implement and to operate in as many places as possible. It's not only important in terms of just generating revenue, which is better as a company usually, but it's also important in terms of training the technology. The first drone that the drone that we have at the moment is still in a way a prototype, like what we call an MVP in a way, a minimum viable product. What we'd like to have in the next 6 months is to bring it with a bit of injection from investors that we had to an MVP stage, to what we call now an MLP, a minimum lovable product, something a bit more mature that would do like the work in a certain way, and that will show to even not early adopters, non-early adopters, the fact that it's a very good one. And for that, we need social desirability. We need more than just like a local support.
Mm-hmm.
We have been supported a lot by someone who was instrumental also to the success, which is who's Richard Lockhead. Is the MSP of Moray. He protested at the UK Parliament against delivery surcharges. And well, funny story on that. He was actually on my deck on the problem slide, and you literally had like Richard Lockhead, a picture from the BBC
Mm-hmm.
with stop delivery surcharges and like protesting, and I used it in my deck. And at some point, someone told me like, you know, that I was classmate with Richard, and I was like, oh, interested in a chat
Right.
maybe, and so we met. I pitched a bit like what we wanted to do, what was the technology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I did that, he was MSP of Moray, member of Scottish Parliament for Moray Council. Moray Council suffered from 4.5, if we consider like the 45 million pounds of delivery surcharges, 4.9 millions were in Moray Council. So quite concerned by the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about 90,000 residents, about 86 maybe, but I'm not completely sure. So yeah, it's a compelling enough problem. Since then, he became Scottish Minister for Innovation. And I'm not into politics, especially because I'm French, so I don't understand very well at the moment what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure many people from the UK actually don't understand either. But
Yeah.
what we have just witnessed is that in Scotland, there is, like in some other places in Europe, in the UK, we are in Milton Keynes at the moment. We were discussing that just before. It's also a growing area for innovation. There are areas where you can get support, and people are pushing for it. And so what we aim for is now we're building up a bit the branding, which is also a reason why I'm here, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only hiring engineers and like doing the work in a workshop. It's also about creating a product and creating something that people want to see.
Exactly.
People, yeah.
And that's really, really good because you've seen the challenge, you understand
Mm,
what the customer's pain points are, and you've to some extent solved it or started to solve it with engineering, but now they need to go buy it.
mm,
And in order for them to buy it, they're not going to buy it just because they need it. They're going to buy it because they want it,
mm,
right? Because we buy things that we want and not need all the time.
mm,
You know, whether it's a £10 Casio watch to 200 and something £1,000 Rolex or whatever that might be, right?
mm.
Those are the things that, yeah, they're exactly the same thing, provide the same function, but one charges
Yeah.
so much more.
Climate. So we are a climate tech. I can explain why. when I said car dependency was a problem, when we looked at the numbers, we were supported by Carbon 13, an accelerator specialized in climate tech, based in Cambridge. And when we looked at the numbers, we realized that yes, we were decarbonating last mile deliveries, but actually the biggest impact was car dependency, the people driving to shops, because on average, a car will emit about 107 grams of CO2 emissions per kilometer. I don't know in miles, when 1.6 is easier, but not thinking in only thinking in metrics, but it means that just like if you have 6 kilometers to get a parcel, it means 12 back and forth, and right away you have you have a kilos actually a kilo of CO2 emission emitted. So that's quite a lot. In terms of last mile deliveries, we're talking about 221 grams of CO2 emissions per parcel, and so that's why what I had to explain also to some stakeholders is that actually in rural areas, and we're talking about something quite specific, delivery is sustainable, because it, even like if you have 100 kilos of groceries, you driving to a supermarket is less efficient than the supermarket having a delivery van and delivering to 6 people who also ordered like 100 kilos of groceries. So just like in terms of energy efficiency, it makes more sense. So delivery is sustainable in rural areas. That said, on a scenario like the delivery van I mentioned, of 10 kilos of cargo delivered to 15 kilometers, not even considering winding roads and complex environments, a delivery van will emit 160 grams of CO2 emission per kilo transported. We are at 16.8 grams.
My gosh.
Including battery manufacturing. So the calculation is based on us, embodied carbon. What we call embodied carbon is like battery manufacturing, composite manufacturing, which is also energy intensive, and we use electricity. So of course, like consumption is not much. If we were just looking at consumption, we're talking about 4 grams of CO2 emission, but it wouldn't reflect the real carbon case. A delivery van, not even considering the production of the delivery van itself, just consumption, it's 160 grams. Because again, it's just physics. We are moving 2 tons of structure for 10 kilos. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And drones have this, like they have this capacity of just a better payload fraction. We are 15 kilos in terms of structure, 10 kilos in terms of cargo. So it's almost 1/2 like of the cargo capacity.
Yeah.
That's to go back on the main aspect. I believe that now we need to consider that people will probably need a lot of education and explanation on this specific aspect, because it's not straightforward. When you say you're going to fly something, it doesn't sound very climate friendly usually.
But when you think about it, I mean, you're flying in a line of sight. So that's the shortest route from point A to point B versus something that has to go around hills, you know, all of that sort of stuff. I don't think also people ever really think about that too.
I think people in rural areas, they understand that very well. Unfortunately, most of the investors and stakeholders are not.
Yeah.
And again, in a way, I'm a city person. Like, of course, I have family attachments to rural places. A part of my family is in a very small village, but I grew up mostly in Paris, and then I worked in London, in Shanghai, in Singapore. So it was meaningful. I guess something also from lockdown, when I said like we had a lot of time, maybe too much. It also made me realize that I wanted to do something meaningful, and just not like creating a company to create a company is useless. It reminds me something. I'm a bit cynical sometimes, and on startups especially. I think many startups are trying to find a solution to a problem that yet doesn't exist, and we have like many examples of amazing pitch and very well-founded startups doing like, there is a real problem. When I'm on holiday, it's a nightmare to park my boat. yeah, it's niche. Like it's not everybody has that
Yeah.
has that problem,
Yeah.
and it just like prioritizing. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to do something that is like on medical or on like it doesn't mean that. It means that we need to find something meaningful. I'm doing sometimes lectures at London Business School, um, and being a bit cynical, I say to MBAs, whatever you do it like to the maximum of your ability. Like if you're an employee in a company, do something important. Like try to push for new products, try to do it better, try to and don't be like just average. And in that case, I say don't be must be average for MBAs.
Hmm.
It's do something meaningful. You are privileged in many ways. You will probably like your worst case scenario compared to many people is to knock at the door of a bank and say like, hey, I do spreadsheets very well, and land a job somewhere. Not probably very interesting, but at least you'll get one. Um, so considering that you have this safety net, do something meaningful. Like go for it.
Yeah. Don't be don't be mediocre.
Mm,
Be great.
yeah.
Absolutely. That really resonates with me actually because I try and say that to all of my team anyway. Um, it's always a case of, and the way how you enable that is to allow people to also to make mistakes because nobody's ever going to get it right first time or do it perfectly the first time anyway. Um, Speaking of team, so you talked a bit about the technology aspect and so on. You talked about the business and the the commercialization of it. What about your team? Who are you working with, and how did you encounter them? How did it grow and develop?
The team was
Hmm.
the biggest challenge, and I probably didn't realize that at first. I did the business school, I did entrepreneurship courses, I worked with startups, but there is a gap between reality and theory. And so it's great, like it was tough. Like the first year was about finding the right people. At the moment, and as I said, I'm not an aerospace engineer. So if I was the only one, like the product, without them, the product wouldn't exist, basically.
Yeah.
Um, so what happened is at first I started with Saif, who just like created this model that works extremely well. Using that, I went to Cronfield, especially, and I worked with the Carrier Center. It's probably an advice I could give to many people potentially considering a startup or like considering a project is don't be don't be shy of reaching out to carrier centers and even bigger institutions. I was alone because Saif is a concept developer, but he lives in Italy now. He's British, but lives in Italy with his kids. So I was literally alone. I needed to find people. When I reached out to the carrier center, my first thought was, I'm too small. Like they will never consider like even reaching like sharing a job ad or anything. But thanks to Antonios, the professor I mentioned before, I just reached out and said like, okay, worst case scenario, I lost 30 seconds of my life writing an email.
Hmm.
I do it. And extremely surprised. Yeah, of course. And we would like to have more startups on board. And we would like to, because people, when you're selling them a good story, a good problem, and a good solution, well, good solution to a problem in this order,
Hmm.
uh, they want to help. And for them, it's 30 seconds, but it might change a lot for you. They not only shared the job ads and the fact that I was looking for engineers, considering that the job ad then was, I don't have money, I don't have much, we have a good idea and a potential interesting drone to develop. Like who wants in?
Wow. Wow.
And a lot of applicants, very surprised also.
Wow. That bit's surprising to me actually because
Yeah,
you factor in, the no money bit to that equation. I'm surprised.
yeah.
This
Again,
must have been a hell of an email that you wrote.
I'm not that good. No, I think the first, I'm lucky not to sell electric toothbrush. No offense to people selling electric toothbrush, but it's easier to sell a drone flying for rural areas.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time, I think many people in aerospace are bored. A problem that I have, for instance, in HR
Hmm.
is I had 300 applicants to like from the career center and like the job ad.
Wow.
Um, a terrible moment because I just can't deal with that many people and like
It's a
that many
lot to cut
interviews.
through. Yeah.
But I went through it and I'd found Nikhil, who's heading the aerospace at the moment, who's a UAV pilot, a UAV expert. He worked on a design office for a design office in India before doing a postgrad at Cronfield. Very, very smart, extremely talented in a workshop. And on that very specific aspect, I'd like to go back. Talented in a workshop means a lot because you have a lot of people in aerospace that are doing not much. You have very large companies in which it's very comfortable. You can sit at a desk, you have 2 hours of lunch break to play golf, and you're doing 9 to 5. And you're just signing a paper from time to time saying, because of the liabilities, of course, involved, it's so important not to do any mistakes. And we are all grateful for that because if you fly, you prefer that it's done the right way, that you have a lot of inefficiencies. And so, very talented engineers in aerospace have spent 5, even more time at the university working with their hands on a workshop. And then they land a job somewhere, and for like the rest of their 30 or 40 years of their life, they're not seeing a workshop anymore.
Yeah.
So they're bored and they lose their touch because
Yeah.
you don't have the same.
They're not pushing those boundaries that they were accustomed to before, right?
I fired 2 PhDs in the company because, well, on paper they were really good. In reality, they were not.
Yeah.
And so Nikhil, he's good on both, and it's a very, very talented person. And at the same time, that's also why I had 300 applicants. It's because when you ask people, what do you want to do? Do you want to work in a big company? Some of them will say yes, of course. Or do you want to try something? Like just if you have the possibility to try something.
Yeah.
And so that's why they were extremely interested in doing something meaningful. And so that's why I think I'm doing a call here. More women in aerospace. On the 300 applicants, only 2 women. Yeah, it's
Really?
not very gender equal.
Wow.
Because, and at the moment in my company, I only have women. I only have men,
Yeah.
and that's understandable. So I'm considering people first on their skills, but the problem is coming from the fact that because aerospace is very traditional, people who are going to aerospace usually, when they started to think about it, it's like, yes, we're going to build fighter jets. And so connecting with social desirability again, what I want to prove with IONA is that first we are creating a corporate environment in which you can thrive as an engineer with ideas, and you're not going to just sit at an office and we have a workshop and you can propose new ideas and everything. But at the same time, aerospace is not only about building fighter jets.
Yeah.
You can do something else and you can actually help people and you can do something that has nothing to do with defense. If the defense industry wants my drone, yes, of course, but they would use it as a delivery van. Like it's the same way they can buy a delivery van, they can buy my drone, but it's not something that is optimized to be weaponized or anything. So it's just logistics, which is very important for the defense industry, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Yeah. I really, really like that. That means you are a very, very purpose-driven business then.
Yeah, we try. And I think that's what, well, that's what brought the talents in the first place. And that's, it's still very early. So it's a bit weird me like in a podcast saying like, yeah, almost like if it was done, like, yeah, I've been running the business for 10 years. This is how it
Well,
is.
you speak like you have been. Yeah.
Well, I hope it's not, it doesn't sound arrogant at least because it's still like the challenges are still ahead.
Yeah.
We just passed a few, let's say.
Yeah.
Now my real challenge is actually HR. Like we are 7 at the moment in the company. We will probably grow quite fast for news that I can't reveal here and before September, but there is a US expansion that is coming with good partners. And the thing is, I want to keep a corporate culture in a remote environment. We are literally doing logistics in remote places, so we have to be remote friendly. It means that when you're 7, I can be with everyone, and I can make sure that it goes in the direction that I want. With like the trying to shape a bit the corporate culture, even if I think that the corporate culture is mostly shaped by the people and not necessarily the person in the first place. Um, when you start to be 10, 20, 30, it's something that I never experienced before. And in that case, the challenge is how will I make a corporate culture that is like interesting, pushing people, and avoiding all the stupidities that I saw in the business world before as an employee.
Yeah.
And so at the moment, for instance, we don't have working hours because let's take an example. I'll be in the US in September. Why should I have working hours if just the time difference means that the hours are different? Like, it just be available when we need you at normal hours. But I'm not a morning person, and I work with Conrad, second person very important in the company. With Nikhil, he was like the second one, and he's specialized in mechatronics and aero robotics. With Conrad is South African. He wakes up at 6. You will never see me at 6, like never. And so we already have different time zones in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we have to create, like, that's one of the stupidities that I want to get rid of from,
Right.
like, but it's easier to say when you're 7.
Yeah.
What about 200 people? Will I be able to do that with 200 people?
Yeah.
Not sure.
Yeah. There are definitely practicalities and implications with that. We have something similarish with our own setup here because we have web developers in Ukraine and we have people obviously in the UK. We have people in Guyana in South America as well. So we have people across multiple time zones. One of the things that we're trying to do, because we're small at the minute, is just to make sure that we have crossover. So, and it's a lucky thing. You're absolutely right. It's a lucky thing that a person in South America wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and that's perfect for them. They enjoy it. You ask me, you'll never see me again. Right. I am definitely in the land of Nod at that point. But yeah, it is not something that's scalable.
Hmm.
So you have to have some level of crossover time zone shift, especially if you graduate from like 10 to maybe 50,
Hmm.
because then you have to. It's just a necessity.
Yeah.
But for now, and same as us as well, we don't really have a working time in this job that we do here.
Hmm.
We operate core hours between 10 and 4, but it's just because it means that everybody is up and can talk to each other at that point. But I never say to anyone, you have to be here at 9 or whatever, unless we have filming or something like that to
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
But people are responsible. So when I say we don't have working hours, if we have an on-site, I expect everybody to be there at least, as you said, core hours,
On time.
10, 10,
Yeah.
4, something like that, or for meetings. In
Yeah.
that case, people are there. But everybody is responsible. First, because I'm not very like good at pushing people, and I don't want to micromanage them. So let's say that out of laziness, I'm not behind and I don't micromanage. And if I need to do that with someone, this someone will not stay in the company. It happened in the past. I had to fire a few people because it was just not the right fit. It doesn't mean that it's not. I like the Dutch way of seeing stuff in terms of HR. It's not personal. Like, you're not a fit for the company at the moment. It doesn't mean that you're not a good person, or like, it just, we are looking for a specific mindset at the moment because
Yeah.
we work in a certain way, and you need to be there at certain working hours. If we are 300 at some point, what we will need to have, especially with aerospace regulations and everything, we will need to have working hours in a way, or at least some people will have more strict hours than others. But in that case, what you can give is flexibility. If you need to, yesterday, someone had to just like do a house visit, house viewing in Milton Keynes. Yeah, you can leave whenever you want. I'm not going to track like, oh, you did a break between that, and if you want to, like, you have sports or something, and the tennis court was free at exactly that time, and you prefer to do it in the middle of the day, as long as it doesn't affect the day-to-day business, and that people can, like, that you make sure that anybody who could need you at that time had access to you, and that made sure that it's not going to affect anything, you're responsible. I like to see that as society. Um, as French, I read a lot the French Enlightenment years, and you have like the way society works. It's a time when people started to think about what makes society acceptable despite inequalities, despite everything. And something that works, I think it's Rousseau in that case, is uh, you your liberty, like in your freedom, stops where the freedom of others starts. So it's exactly like that in a company.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind you taking a break, like a 2 hour break in the middle of the day, as long as it doesn't affect anybody else in the business.
For sure. Yeah.
That's it.
That
And
is that is very true, and you'll probably find that goes across the same for values as well, and
mm,
all sorts of other things, including like religion and you name it. When you get involved in like company cultures and trying to build out teams which have very
mm,
different sets of people from different cultures and backgrounds and geographies as well.
yeah,
So yeah, yeah. No, it's a thing that yeah you gradually start to figure out that we're not like programmable AI little machines that you can kind of train as a model and
yeah.
then it will work perfectly. It doesn't work like that with people. You
How
have to
how did you hire the first people? What were you looking for in your company?
nice people.
Yeah,
I mean that, right? I didn't try to hire somebody who was technically skill set
yeah,
all there, all right? Um, I looked for someone who I could get on with
yeah.
uh, in the company and also someone who paid attention
Okay.
and uh, they might not have seen the entirety of the vision because
Mm,
only you know what is in your head,
mm,
but they were willing to go on the journey.
mm,
They were willing to take a chance with the most valuable asset that we all have, which is our time,
mm.
right?
Yeah,
That's why I make it a point now when I speak to people, especially those who I work with, and even friends as well. Like if they've chosen to spend their time with me, then I thank
mm,
them for it because that is at the end of the day all we have to truly possess, right? If you think
yeah.
about it logically, we don't have anything else that we ever really ever hold,
Okay.
right? So the clothes that you wear will one day fade. You know, the watch that you buy will one
Yeah,
day stop working. But the time that you have is something that you give away. You never get it back.
yeah,
Right? So choose who you spend it with very, very,
yeah,
very wisely. Don't spend it with idiots. Don't spend it with people. When you're at a certain age, when you're like in your 18, 19, 20s, you don't really think about it.
yeah,
So then it's kind of like, and you've got a lot of time because
yeah.
you got a big chunk of it. There's one movie, I think it might have been something with Justin Timberlake in it, where he's got like a certain amount of time,
Time
and
out.
yeah, timeout or something like that, and then he has to keep
Yeah,
topping it up or whatever
yeah,
it is, right? But it is true, right? When you're young, you've got a lot of time, and you don't really think about it, and therefore it's great for experimentation. But when you reach a
yeah,
certain point, especially when you're running something like a business, you're going to have people asking for your time in all sorts of different ways.
yeah.
All sorts of different ways. And the ones who take your time up, and when you pull back a little bit, you kind of go, actually, should I have been spending time with that person? Because, they just literally took maybe 2, 3 hours out of my entire lifetime. And it was for what?
Yeah, I think it's also something
Mm,
that we all went through when you grow up and you start to lose touch with people.
mm,
Some of them are just like, yeah, you might have a fight or something like that, but most of them it's just like actually the relationship was not that interesting in a way, or you realize that I know that coming from like a certain background in Paris, I actually lost touch with many people.
yeah.
And when I started to travel, I realized that those people were probably not the best influences on my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not necessarily bad ones, but
Yeah.
just like they were really, really, well, potentially a bit of French culture here. Really, really happy that everybody is like staying in the same position, and like, and you're not doing interesting stuff, but at least like nobody does, and
Yeah.
like, and you end up like in some kind of a vicious circle that is.
Yeah.
So you
You,
just made me realize something. I'm trying to think about onboarding people better at the moment, and it's difficult sometimes because I have meetings outside and everything. So I'm not constantly like, we have 1 or 2 days on site minimum per week, but potentially it would be nicer to have more than that at least in the first. So I need to find the right balance, and I need also to explain. So I have a deck specific for that. Startup people likes decks, I guess, and I'm trying to just like, if I'm being transparent, if I try to reflect on it, what are the values? And one thing that I want to do with the team, actually, it's coming from an advisor, is just meeting 20 minutes. What are the things that you think are important to in work, and what are the things that you think are not important in work? If you're talking about like work culture and everything, not of course like general. So, for instance, not important. Some people might say, I actually don't mind that people are late. Some people will hate that. Some people will say like, "Oh no, it's not a problem."
mm,
And so, like, just trying to see where my team is in terms of values, in terms of beliefs, in terms of the things
hmm.
that matter for them, and trying to adapt the company's culture to it. And something that I probably didn't emphasize enough is spending time together.
Yeah.
And I think I will have to edit it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Made me work.
No, no, well, that's good. I mean, I'm glad you've come today and you've kind of
Yeah.
started to give yourself some own self inspiration, I guess, or whatever you might want to call that. For me, it was a slightly different case because the reason why with my business, I set it up as being values based a little bit late, but I suppose still fairly early on than
Mm,
some other people would have done it. And I did it primarily because of what I had encountered before. And I thought, what were the reasons why I worked somewhere and I no longer work there?
mm. Okay.
Right. And it came down to intangible things. It came down to things like the first one was support. So I was working in a place and the kind of stuff that we were given as work materials were like really underspec laptops and things like that. And if you're doing a certain type of job, you need to have a beefy machine, right?
Mm,
So that for me was something. So yeah, I wasn't given the, I suppose, the support of the tools that I
mm,
needed to have in order to do a good job. And then support also came in the form of things like, um, yeah, financial compensation as well. You need to be earning a certain amount in order to be able to live, for starters. But secondly, if you're doing a good enough job and there is money in that pot, then you should reach in and take it out and give it to your team, give it to your
mm,
staff. And that wasn't what was happening, right?
mm.
Um,
What?
and I could see because they're massive, massive businesses, massive corporates, but corporates don't really ever think like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
right? So, when your business gets to the size where it's like 1,000 people, 500, oh, whatever it's going to
Yeah.
be, you need to think of that because the people who you employ need to share in the wealth creation that you're bringing into the business. So that was support.
Yeah.
The next bits for me was trust.
Mm,
Trust is a really, really big one because you can only ever lose it
mm,
and it is earned through the other one, which is respect.
mm,
But trust is gained by giving it, right?
mm,
And you get it back. So I trust that somebody is going to show up on time,
mm.
etc., do the job. And the moment that starts to go, then that trust starts to wane,
Yeah.
you know. And that then equates to the other thing as well, which is respect, because it is a respect thing, right? If
Yeah.
you hire somebody to do a job, you expect them to do it properly. If it starts to dip below a certain way, then you kind of need to say something, right?
Yeah.
But they also need to be respectful of your time as well.
It goes both way,
Yeah.
and even like on the respect, I think many people, especially like if you're the founder or like the CEO of the company, people will say like, oh, you like is expecting that the people respect his work, the people respect his time and everything. It actually goes both way. It's because we respect the people we work with
Mm.
that I'm not telling them that they can't have a break in the middle of the day, or that because I trust that in the end, if they do something, there is a reason,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I don't even have to know why.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it just yeah, do it.
I know exactly what you mean there. So in other corporate environments, you'd have to kind of say all the different, you'd have to explain yourself.
Yeah,
5 minutes late, why are you late? That kind of thing. I never wanted that for my business.
it creates a vicious circle.
Exactly. Because it could have been for any number of
Mm,
reasons. It could have been, A, there wasn't enough hot water, you had to go switch it on. You don't have to want to explain those types of things to people. Just,
mm,
yeah. And it happens to the best of us. The respect thing is really, really crucial as well, because I think I was reading somewhere about this where like someone had said like in order to be a leader you shouldn't say things like you should just kind of command the presence and then say, well, you know instead of saying sorry I'm late or whatever, you just say, okay, so what do we next need to do, almost like
mm.
kind of like not caring
Yeah,
or not being respectful of
I'm
other
above
people's time.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're almost above it just because you're the leader.
yeah,
I make it a point that if I don't try and do something, I try, if I remember, and that
yeah.
comes to the other thing, if I remember, I'll say to somebody, look, I'm sorry I couldn't make that time because of X, Y, Z,
Mm,
right? Because sometimes other things just get in the way as well. Other people won't understand it, maybe fully, but you
mm.
still need to kind of say,
It
right?
reminds me, Reed Hastings, a great book, the creator of Netflix, the No Rules Rule, and in it you have the fact that at Netflix you don't have holidays. So there is what is written in the book. There is like the reality. I don't know if there is a massive gap in between because, well, we never know. I'm not working there, but he says you can take holidays whenever you want, and you don't have like we're not counting. But what he also says is when he started that, people were not taking holidays at all. And so usually that's the figures that you realize when companies and startups, especially mostly in the US, are saying no, we don't we're not counting anymore. It's like you can take holidays whenever you want. The reality is that people will probably not take even less holidays than the amount that they could have had.
Mm-hmm.
And so Reed Hastings was saying not only you have to implement that rule, but you have to also enforce it by showing that you are doing it. And so it's a bit like the respect that you were talking
Mm.
about in
Leading by
terms
the
of
example, yeah.
yeah, leading by example is super important because the same way, not only if I'm late, I'm apologizing, but also if anything happens, I'm human and I can explain it the same way that I think someone has a good reason if this person needs a break at some point. I can say sorry guys, I'm extremely tired, or like today is
Mm.
not a good day, and I will push, and you won't see a difference, and it won't affect your work. But just I prefer to let you know if my face looks like this, it's not against you. It's
Yeah,
just like
yeah. And
bad
having the
day.
psychological safety to say that, because people should feel comfortable
Yeah.
around each other to be able to say, crack jokes, do whatever,
Mm. Yeah.
obviously as you still respect for the people, but you should feel comfortable
Mm.
enough, like the way how you are. And sometimes that will rub a little
Mm.
bit. It generates a little bit of friction here and there, but it shouldn't be anything that you can't iron out with a quick conversation, right?
Yeah.
And that's
It.
that's kind of like the holy grail.
Yeah, this is exactly the things I again a bit cynical. I called that stupidities earlier. You mentioned more respectfully probably the things that you didn't like in your previous jobs
Mm.
and like the 5 minute late or like the things like that. Well, it's exactly that. Like how to change the way we experienced stuff. I think that a very bad example of it, people will think that I have something against banks because I mentioned it twice now. But in banking, I did London Business School. A lot of my friends are in the city at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And you have investment bankers. And investment bankers, they go through like a cycles of terror, like for 2 3 years. They don't have a life. The working hours are just insane.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even productive. Like the people that you really know doing that, when you ask them, it's actually, yeah, I mean, call back to backs from like from 8 to 4 p.m., completely useless. So I can start my day at 4 p.m., so I end up at 4 a.m. And then I do that like for 2 or 3 years. Like it's terrible. And the worst thing that can happen is that they do that for so long that instead of changing that when they like climb the social hierarchy, or like the hierarchy in the company, or just like get another job, they end up reproducing it. Like you have managing directors in some like corporates that have suffered from it, and instead of saying it was useless, it was completely stupid, I lost my time and I probably lost 10 years of my life because of health issues.
So many countless
Yeah,
relationships that I could have had,
yeah.
which were
And in the end, it's like they're trying to rationalize it. So you see a lot of people saying like, "Oh no, no, but it was really interesting. It made me it
it got me to my MD role where I am today.
and also the worst I heard is no, but it taught me a lot in terms of working intensity. Like I know that I can really do it. And like, yeah, it didn't teach you anything actually. You had that. You had this capacity. You just used it for something that is not meaningful to you.
Yeah,
And you would have had exactly the same working capacity on something that matters, and like go on a tunnel working insane hours for a project,
mm-hmm.
and you could have done that, but on something that you really like, not just because some random person like told you to.
Yeah,
And so yeah, they rationalize it, and then after that sometimes they reproduce it.
they repeat the cycle. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is classic, isn't it? Yeah. So I guess the last point for values with our company as well is inclusion. So that
Mm.
was a big thing for us. And it was the last one that got added to what we were doing because I never thought it needed to be spelt out. But I think if you're building out your company, you want to have it in there.
Mm.
And the reason for that is like far better to have a Swiss Army knife than have a knife that big which snaps and then afterwards you've got no other tools in your arsenal to use.
Yeah.
Swiss Army knife, yeah, you could use it for all
Yeah.
different kinds of things because it includes many different types of tools, some which are very, very specific. The screwdriver, for example, right?
Never used it.
Yeah, yeah. Instead of using the tip of the knife blade and then trying to do it and then snapping that off,
Yeah.
you get something that works best for specific things. And when you include different types of people in your team,
Yeah.
and I don't mean just, backgrounds in terms of ethnicity, which is the first thing that people think of, but it could just be neurodiversity, for example, right? Those are the types of people which might be best applied to a specific problem or thing that you need to have solved for you. And you need to have those types of people in your arsenal. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's stir, support, trust, inclusion, and respect. Yeah.
You're far ahead. I need to do that work again then.
That's fine.
But
But it can apply to any company, right?
Yeah.
The same thing that I've said to you, you don't necessarily have to reinvent wheels or anything. And values which you determine and you set should be ones which matter to you, especially as the founder. Those are the ones that mattered to me. Other people have got, like, a lot of people do things through like putting out maybe like a survey or something. And like you said, yeah, asking everybody else what they think. But that will give you only what everybody else is thinking. But what do you want for your company as you shape it? And that's the different thing which I didn't really get right at the beginning, but now it's set. It defines the culture that we develop in the business. And value determines the culture, and then the culture is created by the people. And if somebody isn't supportive, trusting, inclusive, or respective of others, they're just not going to be in this business.
Yes, reminds me something also in terms of trust. something that I often say to people in my team is if you have an idea, go for it. And it's just, I had a question for you, which is what made you start? And I'm not sure what made you start, but I just asked exactly this question to a lot of people who have created companies. And something that is a pattern is from the outside, when I listen to podcasts a lot, for instance, and read books a lot on people who created companies or like on nonfiction, what we say nonfiction now, a lot of people like exactly like I did. I had this problem in a small village in Brittany and we did that. And as someone in the audience, you might think, oh, it's like there was a problem, he found a solution, he went for it. The reality is much more complex. The reality is that for like 2 months, I was, should I go there? Like, am I really like dropping a steady work and like I could just like land a job in somewhere nice and everything? Is it like tangible enough?
Mm-hmm.
At first, it was also not exactly the same idea. It was drone delivery. Yeah, it sounds like a good solution to a problem that I identified. But the problem is that I didn't know if the drones was good enough. Like, I didn't know that I will have to create a drone in the first place.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that, to be honest.
Yeah.
And so it just, it's a, yeah, it's a
It's a,
journey.
it is a cascade, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's important for everybody to realize that you're not going from 0 to 1 to take like Peter Steele's book um, right away. And usually it's not even like that in your head. It just by applying a certain mindset of when there is an opportunity, I seize it, and when there is something to do, I go for it. If you apply that to your life in general, and it can be inside a company or outside a company, you will have a lot of opportunities. And so when we implemented that in the company, it created synergies because it means that they don't have to ask me like, hey, there is like a potential supplier or like a partnership that we could do with. Lately, like Conrad, for instance, that I mentioned before, he's working on a partnership and on a grant partnership project with a company in Europe on something that is extremely interesting, what we call structural batteries. So it avoids like a lot of weight and it's like a very interesting technology. And we are considering another partnership with an hydrogen-based company and everything. I didn't have to go for it. I actually didn't negotiate anything with them. He was on holiday. He met someone from an hydrogen company and he went for it himself
Mm-hmm.
because he did it. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna have a second meeting just in case. Like worst worst case scenario, I lose an hour of my life.
Yeah.
That's it. And best case scenario can be very interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah,
But
so
but
to
it
get
was his choice, right?
yeah,
So yeah.
and so main question: why did you start, and how was it? Like, what was the feeling at first?
Oh, it's a very good question for me. For me, it was all about. I felt that my time had come. I felt that I'd always wanted to go and do and develop something on my own. I think
Mm-hmm.
many people get that kind of calling.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is, like you said, if I was to advise anybody if they wanted to set up a startup or run a business, it's probably much easier, less difficult ways of earning money as opposed to trying something like this, because to get it going, it's
Yeah.
hard. To keep it going, it's even harder. But what I tried to do was to give myself my own advice,
Mm,
is figure out who I wanted to spend time with
mm,
and find those people. And those are the types of people that I come into work and I kind of go, wow, I enjoyed
mm.
being around those people. Yeah. Yes, and I don't mean that you shouldn't hire people that you don't like. Yeah. Because you might not like your accountant or you might not like your lawyer or whatever that might be. But yeah, I a lot of the decisions are my choices, and and I actually love seeing people grow. So for me, they're like plants in a way. They start out very small,
Yeah,
just seedlings. There's
yeah,
no idea of how fruitful this thing is going to work out.
yeah,
You don't even know whether you planted a weed or not.
yeah.
It's true. There might be weeds, but you see it grow and it gradually gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the more you water it and you
Yeah.
give it sunshine, etc. And then if you put it in just the right conditions, it flourishes, but it grows. You can put it in that same plant
Mhm.
somewhere else and it will only ever be like this big because it'll be stunted. It won't get any nourishment. It won't
Mhm.
get any sunshine. It wouldn't get all of that stuff. You put it in somewhere which is really amazing. It's hot, warm,
Mhm.
humid.
Yeah. And so in terms of feeling, did you wake up one day saying like, okay, I take the leap? Or was it, how was the process? Like the switch, you were dissatisfied with your previous like life in a way, working life, I mean, like many people.
Yeah.
And so what made you make this, like what made you switch?
I think is being able to set your own destiny. I think that's a big, big part of it.
Okay.
It is the choice. I would always say that that is like it's like, choosing to hold a sword,
Okay.
right? Because it can cut you down to shreds.
Yeah.
But if you're good enough, you're able to hold it and you can handle it really well eventually. But it's also very dangerous as well,
Yeah.
right? Because you got mortgage to pay, you got family to, feed. All of those types of things are the things that you're going to give up if you've got a regular 9 to 5 day job and you are earning a certain amount and you're well respected by your colleagues. The work is not too bad and all of that stuff. But self-determining
Mhm.
is definitely one of those things that I've always felt was always in me,
Have you
even at the detriment of all those other things.
and have you incorporated the company to push you in a way, or have you started to work on the company and then incorporated? Very
Oh,
pragmatic
so how do
level.
you mean? Like, did I start running it before I left or?
Yeah, I personally used the UK is great for that. It's not the case in many countries in Europe. You can incorporate a company, FYI for the audience, for £12, and it takes 30 minutes.
Oh, yes.
Uh,
So I
that's a big step.
incorporated mine in 2015 and I was still working at the time, but I
Okay.
got clearance for it. As in, I said to somebody, I'm setting up this thing, it won't affect work. And that's the truth. I went to work from 9 to 5. From 7 to 12, I was working on my business and I wake up the morning and repeat the
Mm.
cycle again. And you have to do that for some period of time. Don't
So,
just leave your job, folks, right? Because you think it's a great idea to go for a
yeah,
startup. You have to put in some graft.
yeah. This is what I wanted to understand because, again, I think too many podcasts and books make us think that it was one day it was zero, the other day it was one.
Yeah.
And it's a steady process and it's a long one. And the thought process is, even in my case at least, it was longer than the product process. It was just like, can I call myself an entrepreneur? Like, I didn't want to fall in the trap of like, I'm the CEO. No, you're the only one in the company. You're CEO of nothing.
Yeah.
And so it's a steady process of like, yeah, imposter syndrome, of course, and everything. And I think it has to stay in a way, like it keeps you awake. But it's a steady process of, okay, don't think that it's gonna go from 0 to 1. And for instance, what I use personally is that I like to put myself in difficult conditions,
Mm.
not terrible ones. But when I started IONA, not only I incorporated the company, but when I okay, went for it, I started to tell all my friends I'm creating a company. It was extremely risky in a way. Not many chances that it will succeed. Not risky in a terrible way, like my life was not at risk, but risky in a way that I wanted to make sure that if I was not going for it, I will have to explain that to all of my friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that if you do that, well, at least this is what I use. But maybe I'm lazy by nature. I don't know. I used like a lot of those nudges in a way to get the ball rolling.
To push you.
Yeah, especially because nobody will do it for me.
Oh God, nobody.
Yeah,
You haven't got
yeah,
any person with a little needle pushing you over the cliff. Nobody like that,
yeah,
right? If you do have, you've got a really good friend
Or
if they've got a needle and they're shoving you over the
yeah.
edge, or family that are pushing you in that particular direction, or a mentor. But yeah, you're gonna have to do it for yourself.
Yeah, it's true. And it's probably for me, it was the hardest challenge at first.
Mm.
Just like, okay, I not a morning person, as I said. I have to wake up at some point.
Hmm.
And so, okay, I need to do that. I think sports really helped on that, like to have a structured life in a way.
Mm.
But I have to wake up in the morning. I have to sit in the front of a computer. At the time, I was living in a very very small room in London because of London, and so my room was about like 8 meters square, and it was my kitchen, my office for the entire day. No light at all, like I was facing a wall, and I spent awful 6 months, like awful 6 months, and it was tough, but I learned a lot in the right way in this one, which is I learned to structure the work in a certain way. But it was difficult, and it was a process, and it didn't happen like, yeah, suddenly I start a company and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
everything is set. Or I
yeah.
think the probably the advice I would give to everybody is, because you don't have someone with a needle, uh, you need to push, like you need to know you enough, and introspection is very very useful,
Mm.
in order to trick your own mind, like
You have
certain.
to be delusional to a certain degree. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You have to think that this crazy idea is going to work.
Mm,
And, you know, and nobody is there to say and give you any validation apart from yourself, really.
yeah,
So,
I
yeah.
forgot who said that, but I heard once, entrepreneurship is necessarily someone who's not exactly healthy in a way, because it's like you see a situation and you're like, I could do better,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is weird. Like when you
Yeah.
think about it, it's like, yeah, we're like 7 billion now on the planet. Nobody probably did it the way I could. And like,
Yeah.
that's really weird
Yeah.
in a way. And you have to, if I knew the challenges of aerospace well, I probably wouldn't have started. And
Yeah.
it's because it was a steady process, and that you actually realize that you're capable of more, of more, and of more. Some people like, just we have a chat and everything and say like, oh, I wouldn't be able to do that. Well, you never tried. And
Yeah.
if you
How do you
were,
know?
yeah, if you were to the point where you have to, probably you would do actually.
Yeah.
It's not that difficult. It just, what is difficult is having the right mindset to get there. But
Yeah.
the thing in itself, like running a meeting, running interviews and everything, speaking in front of an audience, like, yeah, at first it's not exactly natural, but you have
Speaking
to.
of which, you're French, right? Obviously.
Yeah.
And English is your second language, or maybe third or fourth. I don't know. But that must have been extremely daunting because
Yeah.
not only are you not communicating in your own
Yeah.
everyday language, you're having to communicate in
Yeah.
something else.
The first 6 months that I mentioned, before every meeting with every, so one thing that I had to use is, let's have as many meetings as possible. Not only I'm French, but I had a terrible English until the age of 18. So, because French systems, like probably anybody who went to Paris for a holiday or something like
English is
that.
probably worse, trust me. We know very little other
And so,
languages.
yeah, and just like for the first 6 months, not only I was taking as many meetings as possible, because I needed to like to understand the problem better, understand the tech better, meet with as many people as possible, sell the product. For instance, you're not a natural seller. Like it's a process also. When you're pitching 1,000 times, yeah, you're good at pitching. But if the pitch works well now, it's because I did it 1,000 times. And some people might do it in tens. I'm not talented, so I have to work. Um, in the first 6 months, I had to prepare before every meeting, and I even had like vocabulary, like lists and everything, to make sure that I will not be in a situation where I just didn't know what was going on, or didn't understand something, or, and yeah, it was a bit stressful.
I bet. I bet. I'm going to ask you just a little bit more about your like what you enjoy doing. You alluded a little bit to sports just now.
Well, I partied a lot when I was younger.
Yeah. Good.
When yeah, I did
How
that.
do you mean when you were younger? You look like you're still quite
I'm
young.
27, so I'm still quite young. But no, I was an event organizer, so I had my fair share of parties and everything, which is good because now I live like a grandpa. So I have 2 liters of herbal tea per night and just like books, and it's great.
Yeah.
I do a lot of sports. I'm coming from a family who's doing a lot of sports too. So I started judo when I was 6. Then I had boxing, Muay Thai, Jiu Jitsu, Penchak Silat, Viet Vo Dao, a lot of martial arts basically. I'm doing MMA now as a routine, just like to keep shape in a way.
Yeah.
I did a bit of championships in boxing when I was 14 to the age of 17, about.
Wow.
And I doesn't. I heard that it doesn't appear that much. When I'm tired, I still have a few things, but
Yes.
and I think sports is well. The first 6 months that I mentioned, for instance, I stopped because of money. Now it became popular. Like boxing, it was the cheapest sport you could do
Mm.
10 years ago. Now it's so popular that you have like gyms with like fees at 200 per month or something. You have a sauna, a jacuzzi. You're not boxing at all, but it's great.
You're just going for, yeah, for a spa day. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I stopped for 6 months, and I blew a fuse.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, even again tricking a bit my mind, when a day is tough, the worst that can happen is this: if you take like an habit of, oh, it was a terrible day, I'm gonna have a beer. If you start that, it's a slippery road.
Mm.
Um, if you do sports because you have a routine, you won't have like the need or even the will to get for a beer afterwards. Like, because you're just like, I had a long day, I did sport, going to bed.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you can't party anymore. It just means that it's a balance. I think sports and books is what bringing balance,
Yeah.
at least in my life.
What book are you reading right now?
At the moment, I'm on Amazon, probably because of deliveries. And there is a cool book, Amazon Unbound, um, which is from Brad Stone, I think.
Mm.
And it's quite interesting. It's like the side projects of Amazon, because Amazon, it's of course like deliveries, but it's first and foremost almost AWS and all the services that they did around and everything. And I was interested in like the culture, actually, again because of the HR aspect. So I'm reading always like 2 or 3 books at a time, and the other book that I'm reading is Hiring by Attitude, which is also on a bit what we discussed. You hire somebody because you get along with, the dynamics work in a way,
Hmm.
and it means that we're not completely sure of where we go, but it's going to create value,
Yeah.
and that's probably the most important. So yeah, 2 books at the moment, but I would strongly recommend probably um, Shoe Dog from Phil Knight, the Nike story.
Right.
Amazing. The guy is an amazing storyteller. It's a page turner, and at the same time, it's really crazy. Like, and that's the budding years of a company, when literally he was working his day job, like receiving shoes from Japan on the evening, like packing stuff, like doing everything himself, and with a small team at first, and like it's really like the great story, and at the same time very very inspiring.
Very good. Very good. Awesome. So, thank you very much, Etienne, for coming today to our podcast. There's so much I've learned about you and your business and your incredible story, and also to hear a bit about your vision as well of what you have planned to make this company truly amazing and incredible. So, thank you very much for spending time with us.
It was a pleasure.
You're welcome. And if you'd like to find out a bit more about Etienne and his company, then please check out the description area. But for now, thank you and catch you next time.